Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whatever your time zone, welcome. This is AI Talk, and I am your host, Kevin Crane. Welcome to the show. Today, we will be discussing the topic of AI in the pharmaceutical industry. Artificial intelligence is reshaping how organizations of all kinds operate, and that includes pharmaceutical companies who are using AI to innovate, compete, and remain compliant. For example, according to SciLife, AI applications in pharma are projected to generate over $410 billion in annual value by the end of the year. But with this opportunity comes risk, especially when sensitive data and regulated processes are involved. So, how can pharmacy leaders harness AI responsibly to unlock value while safeguarding data and compliance? Well, in this session today, we'll explore three areas to consider. We'll look at trends reshaping strategic decisions and what trends matter. We'll examine some high value use cases and what we can learn from them. And we'll touch on how responsible AI use in critical processes can mitigate compliance risk. We're going to dive in just a second, but first I want to say thank you to everybody attending today, and that includes the folks that are joining us live on LinkedIn. Hello, everyone. And hello, everybody joining us today on Zoom. Thank you so much for being with us. Look, we would like to hear from you today too. So we'd like to encourage everyone attending today to participate. So please join in with your comments in the chat section. If you have a question along the way, jump on in. I will attempt to get some of your questions and comments into the flow of the show today. And we may have a few minutes also at the end. But for now, let's get to our great panel of guests today, starting with Thomas Van Dorp, pre-sales architect at Sejeka. Thomas, are you with us?
I am.
Hello.
Nice to be on. Thank you for having me. Nice to be here.
Hello, Thomas. There you are. Very good. Where are you calling in from today, Thomas?
I'm calling in from New York City. So for me, it's 11 a.m. At this time.
Wonderful. Well, welcome aboard from New York, Thomas. Thank you so much for being with us. Also with us today is Julie Daves, President and Principal Consultant at JVD Pharmaceutical Consulting. Julie, welcome aboard. Where are you calling in from today?
Morning. I'm calling in from just outside of beautiful Boulder, Colorado. Glad to be
Boulder,
here and
wonderful.
looking forward to our chat today.
Well, that's fantastic, Julie. Thank you so much for being with us today. And also with us today is Dave Anderson, founder and CEO of Data Company. Dave, thank you so much for joining us here at the last minute. Dave, where are you calling in from?
Hi, Kevin, and hello to everyone out there. I am calling also from the beautiful state of Colorado, Denver more specifically. So happy to be here. Thanks for having
Well,
me.
Dave, Julie, Thomas, it is great to have you with us. Thank you so much for being with us. Look, I'd like to start our discussion off today by pointing our attention to an article published recently by McKinsey called Reimagining Life Science Enterprises with Agentic AI. Agentic AI is certainly a topic that is getting a lot of attention today, and the article argues that agentic AI systems that act autonomously as coworkers rather than just tools can transform workflows across pharma and med tech. By automating or augmenting workflows, companies can free up a lot of capacity. The authors say somewhere between 25 and 40% and dramatically boost growth and earnings. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the article, everyone. I'd like to start with you, Thomas. What did you think about the article?
Yes, I like the article very much, mainly because it's trying to break down the question that we all trying to ask ourselves these days. So it starts with nearly 8 in 10 companies use GenAI, but 80% report no tangible bottom line results. I think we have all heard it in the news and seen that you can just take a business process, put the AI on it, and hope for the best results. It gives a good insight in what the path to implementation could be. There's change management to be done in a business context, and that takes time. And it gives some good advice on how to cope with that. For example, giving a top-down mandate from the management with a compelling change story, upskilling, reskilling your workforce with trainings, incentives, redefining your business processes with tasks that can integrate with agents. And most importantly, especially for this pharma industry, putting the right guardrails, data security, and keep a human in the loop. So all these things could be helpful tips to move forward in this discussion. So very interesting article.
Indeed. And Julie, the article, what I like about the article is it's operationally focused on like workflows and process improvement, really where the rubber kind of meets the road. What are your impressions of the article?
Well, I'm a clinical trialist, and I loved the methodology here. I mean, they took 270 workflows and 12,000 tasks in 180 different job categories, and then they analyzed which of those could be, I don't want to say taken over, but perhaps augmented with AI. And so to me, that was it was a fascinating and very methodical approach. And like Thomas was saying, I mean, a lot of the other thing that in the article really struck out to me was there's an investment period in terms of labor and time and running pilots and trying things. But for that investment period, you get a return. So for example, in like clinical operations, the article analyzed that with an 8 or 9% investment in time to partner with AI, you can get a 40 or 50% improvement in productivity. Now, the key here, just like you said, Thomas, is it's not, hey, let's just hand everything to AI and sit back and see what the screen says. It's partnering with AI. It's treating it like a fellow employee or a colleague and helping to train it and helping it to understand. Because the more you invest in it, the better it will do. So I thought it was a fascinating article, actually, just with the methodology. Yeah.
Well, Dave, Julie is bringing up an important point. Realizing all of this requires not just rethinking maybe data and governance and architectures, but also rethinking the roles and the way the organization works with AI. What are your thoughts about the article?
Yeah, great insights by both Thomas and Julie there. So I'll try to add, but I think what struck me was, again, building on that concept of keeping in mind AI as an assistant to the activity that people are already doing in their work, and realizing it's an evolution. And I think there's a lot of hype and there's a lot of expectation around what AI is really capable of doing in sort of an autonomous fashion, but recognizing that it's a step process to get there. And when you're in the sort of in the coal mine with the pick and shovel every day with AI, the way we are, you recognize you can gain a recognition of what that process looks like, and the importance of understanding that in order for AI to be effective, it has to be fed, it has to be nurtured, it has to be grown in a very thoughtful way. And so I thought what struck me about the article, especially, was highlighting those types of activities that lend themselves. You can see the activities that lend themselves to that sort of step learning process are the ones where there's more opportunity for short-term efficiency gains. So that really was one thing that stood out to me.
Well, the article is from McKinsey. It is called Reimagining Life Science Enterprises with Agentic AI. There's a link here in the chat feature if you'd like to take a look. We'd like to hear what you think as well. What do you think of the article? Did it miss something important that we should also be considering? Does it resonate with you folks in terms of your experience day to day? Interesting article. All right, very good. Well, folks, I'd like to move us on to our first discussion point today, and that is how AI trends are reshaping strategic decisions in the pharmaceutical industry. Understanding these trends will help us make informed choices about where to invest and how to stay competitive today. Thomas, I'd like to start with you today on this. From your vantage as a pre-sales architect at Sageca, what AI trends are you seeing pharma organizations prioritize today, and how is it shaping their strategic roadmaps?
Yeah, great question. I think I talked to a lot of companies in the pharmaceutical industry, medtech, biotech, and pharmaceutical manufacturers. And there's one common divider, and security is the main thing for them. Let's put that aside for a minute and see how the trend is evolving first. This technology, there's never been a technology that has been adopted or went to market this quickly. People using ChatGPT all the time. So the adoption on a personal level is huge of a very promising technology. To the point of Dave, and it was very interesting, the expectations about AI are very high. So there's this paradox in the way we think, that the short-term potential, we think it's huge, but when it doesn't live up to these expectations, we tend to give up and we think the shares will drop and it's just a bubble. But I really believe that the long-term potential is maybe underestimated, because while people are testing out AI, companies are building great solutions with agents, combining a whole toolbox of first your large language model, but also the knowledge base that it ties to. It's creating, for example, MCP servers. It stands for Model Context Protocol. These are safe and secure interface layers which an LLM can use, a large language model such as ChatGPT, to connect to your business data. So we're trying to find ways to safely connect to your business data and business logic, but while always thinking about security. But that takes time. It takes time to build these solutions. You have to test them out and you have to build them. So I really believe middle, long, short term, long term, there's a lot of potential in there, but you have to do it step by step. So trend-wise, that's my view on it. I also read an interesting article. It's called CIO Agenda from Gartner. It was, I think, what would be the paradigm shifts in the strategic assumptions to take for the coming years. And I think, tying to what I just said and the trends, that the investment posture will change. Companies will want to see some return on investment now. We have invested in AI, experimented with AI, but now the time has come to build extendable, scalable solutions that actually bring value. There's also the idea of where's my data processed. So the geographical question always plays, sourcing from local vendors, working with local vendors who can help you with your AI questions. That's also an important consideration and trend and strategy. But then also the planning horizon, the speed that it's going. Typically companies, we're, I think, a bit through budgeting season now. We make a budget for the next year and we plan it out. But the pace at which this development is going will need some more flexibility to dynamically reprioritize resources towards what is important. And also investment in career and growth opportunities, also within pharma companies. Typically, IT is within the IT department. AI will have to break out of it. We'll have to work with the business, and the IT department will have to break out inside the organization to show the value of these AI solutions and really work together externally then within the enterprise context. So that's my view on the trends. I know it's a lot, but I think there's a lot to do as well.
Well, I do want to get Julie and Dave in here in a moment, but Thomas, there were some interesting and important things that I heard you say in there: security, scale, ROI, value, and speed. Given all those trends, what would you advise pharma company executives about aligning their architecture, their strategy, all the parts and pieces to really be able to exploit AI at scale?
Yes, yeah, great point. This might bring me back to the article of McKinsey, how they approached it, and it brings me back to Julie, who talked about the methodology, was really start with mapping out all your workflow and breaking them down into the real tasks. So the low-level tasks, which comprises your workflow, and start there. So start small with some low complexity agents, experiment with it, use AI, embed it within your architecture, and then grow from there. We have seen, once we have a proof of concept or a proof of value in one particular process, could be very small and very non-risky. Once we have that, we can grow and scale with that. So you have to get it in there, get people to understand and work with it, and then you can scale towards more complex processes and also scale towards bigger scope.
All right, Julie, now in your role helping pharma leadership and consulting, how do you see AI influence high-level decisions around things like R&D investment, partnerships, or go-to-market strategies?
Absolutely. I mean, before I dive into sort of pharma nitty-gritty, just to sort of echo a little bit what Thomas said, I mean, that article was really good. It talked about setting up an agent factory sort of leadership group within your organization, and then having sort of some newly defined team roles like agent orchestrators or AI governance. And what I've seen that's worked effectively is to start with a pilot, right? Start with something that is a concrete, especially for small biotech who doesn't have an IT department of 5 million people. Start with a pilot, pick a project that's important to you, and start small. And I think Dave can probably talk to this a little bit too. But specifically to pharma, I mean, especially these days when money is so tight and it's hard to get the level of investments that we had even just a few years ago. I mean, you can really use AI to your point, Kevin, try to identify patient populations, crawl around on clinicaltrials.gov is one example to look at recruitment rates, simulate trial outcomes. And also, I mean, I think since we're all having to stretch our dollars in pharma these days, really looking at AI for partner vendor CRO selection, because that's a huge line item, probably second only to CMC and drug manufacturing stuff. So, I mean, what we're seeing is a lot of people are using AI to identify and compare vendors and ensure oversight and key performance indicators, and things like that. And I know some of my colleagues in big pharma are doing just that as well.
Now, Dave, when it comes to using AI or the trends in AI that are shaping strategic decisions in pharmaceutical industry today, looking at, say, clinical trial analytics, how are AI-driven insights and tools changing decision-making at the senior level for things like go, no-go decisions or portfolio prioritization, those kinds of important high-level decisions?
Yeah, great question. I think the answer is it's still pretty early days for AI actually having significant influence on that. Particularly on the clinical development, clinical trial, side of the business that we're focused on. It's still, heavily manual, heavily spreadsheet, heavily disintegrated processes that the industry has, for obvious reasons, generally been fairly risk averse and slower in adoption than you see in financial services, for example, or manufacturing, because obviously the stakes are sky high, right? So I think it's still early days for that, but I think it's starting to emerge. And to Julie's point, an opportunity that we're seeing is around that clinical trial design and site selection and country selection and patient population design that can start to build on the data assets that the company has collected and the insights that they've collected from prior clinical studies and from, like Julie said, taking data from clinicaltrials.gov and other, types of databases like that to understand what is the competitive environment of clinical trials, for example, in a given geographic area and for a given therapy. And, starting to factor those into that design. And then how that feeds into that that RFP, CRO selection, CRO engagement, site engagement, patient recruiting, all of those types of activities. You can then flow that through to really making all of that much more automated and much more efficient. And there's just lots of opportunity, unlimited opportunity around that. But it's still for fairly early days. And again, it starts with the data assets that the company has and how well they can get those organized, because that forms the context that the AI is able to leverage, and that context and that experience defines how effective the AI is going to be for it.
All right, very good. This is AI Talk, and we are here today with Dave Anderson, founder and CEO of Data Compass, Julie Daves, president and principal consultant at JVD Pharmaceutical Consulting, and Thomas Van Dorp, pre-sales architect at Sageca. We're here talking about AI in pharma. Now, folks, and if you have a question or a comment for our guest, please join in. We'd like to hear what you have to say as well. Join in with your comments in the chat section. And indeed, the best question or comment gets a chance to win one of these highly stylish and highly functional AI Talk coffee mugs. All right, very good. Let's move on to our discussion point number 2 today, and that is looking at some high-value use cases, applications that demonstrate tangible benefits. Thomas, what are some of the most compelling use cases that you've seen for AI in processing large volumes of pharmaceutical documentation, things like regulatory filings and safety reports, trial documentation? Where are some of the opportunities, and what are some of the best use cases that you've seen today?
Yeah, good question. And there's a lot out there. There's a lot of research. There are a lot of pilots going on, and there's a lot of examples you could find with even a simple desk research. But to answer the question, I want to come to Dave's example, actually, about the trials. I think what Dave explained is very comprehensive, and if you put it all together, it's very complex. But if we break it down into individual agents, so I will approach this more from an IT perspective. You could start somewhere. So there's a whole process, a whole manual process with a lot of activities. But actually, how we do it in practice is we break it down into some simple agents, and then you have an orchestrating agent who brings it all together. So to that example of trials, you could have a patient recruitment agent who identifies all the suitable patients. You could have a data monitoring agent who's going over all the sensor data and the wearable devices and monitors that. You can, of course, have a regulatory compliance agent who governs everything and makes sure everything you do is compliant and secure. And to the point of large-scale pharmaceutical documentation in clinical trials, there's so much documentation coming in. There's also an agent that you can build for that to take in this information, and through Graph-RAG technology, so retrieval augmented generation, with context, this documentation can be processed more efficiently. So there's not one agent that I would say do this one, but there's actually multiple agents that you could build based on the scope of a clinical trial. And then with an orchestrator, you can bring it all together. But start with one, then you build a second one, you orchestrate both, and then you scale from there. And maybe one more point, because we're always thinking about the tasks that we do and to replace the tasks that we do with AI. But there's a lot of things that we don't do because they are too uneconomical or too complex, like going through unstructured data sets. This is something where AI could really help us. And this is to Julie's point, of having this AI as a co-pilot. It could help you with tasks that for a human are just too much to comprehend, and it's just not worth the investment to put a person on there. So going through this unstructured data could also be with invoicing, for example, checking all the invoices against contracts or policies, making sure that everything that you pay is actually against what you have agreed upon. It's not a pharma example, but it's an example just in general. So yeah, if I would say something, break down your whole thing that you want to solve, like clinical trials, break it down into smaller agents, have an orchestrating agent bringing it all together, and also think about the processes that you're not doing today because they're just too expensive to do.
Can you give us an example of one use case that has been particularly successful using one of these techniques? What were the results, and what did they do, and what were the results?
Yeah, so the use case that we've done, and actually with a partner, a validation partner, is actually the processing of large-scale pharmaceutical documentation. So we use the technology Graph-RAG for that, which I already mentioned. And actually, the the big benefit is that a large language model has its own knowledge base, but you don't want to use this on pharmaceutical documentation. You need to add industry-specific context to it. GraphRock brings that. So actually, this is a combination of entities where you run all the documentation through. And this combination of entities, I cannot explain it any simpler, is adding context to the data. So patient files, clinical trial results, you run it through a context model first, and then your large language model, being GPT-5, Claude, or there are many out there, is processing it to output. So it's more rich and also more accurate. So that's an example that we have built, and it's about like millions of documents that we process and then have a structured output, which can then be used for further analysis. So it's really saving thousands of hours just by automating a part of this document processing.
All right, very good. We do have some questions and comments coming in from our audience, but I want to get to in just a moment. But Julie, from your view, what are some of the success factors for ensuring such use cases are not just pilots, but actually do get scaled and become embedded into the overall business and deliver real value?
Man, I tell you, I was just sitting here reflecting on when I first started in the industry 27 years ago. We had so much documentation when you would submit an NDA that you literally would have 18-wheeler trucks lined up outside, and you just put the papers in there and ship it off to the FDA. So it's amazing to think about where we are. But we do create a whole lot of documentation in this industry. So, I mean, I think you can look at things like clinical protocol development that can be templated, and the AI agent can be trained, if you will, to go and identify similar trials, similar exclusion criteria, similar sort of patient standard of care. So you don't design a clinical protocol that isn't, plugged into reality of what patients are actually experiencing when they're in the clinic. Looking at reports, clinical study reports, safety reports, pulling data, interpreting the data, scientific publications, and then to what Dave was talking about earlier, which is, and I was recently part of a pilot on this, where you took 3 or 4 proposals for huge global studies, 40, 50 country studies, and you train the AI bot to go through it and identify who has the better qualified staff, whose pricing is better, where are there gaps and inconsistencies in these things. And anybody that's done this knows that these are $100 million projects. And so in terms of, trying to interpret huge amounts of data that has a huge impact, and huge amounts of documents that have a huge impact in terms of cost and quality, I think that's an area where you could really go nuts with this. I can see a couple questions in the chat, so I don't know if we want to.
Yeah, we're going to get to those here in just a second. Well, all right. Well, very good. Well, look, I do want to get to Rebecca's question here. Rebecca has been waiting, and then John has some discussion. Perhaps, Dave, you can help me with this question from Rebecca. And Rebecca, thank you for your contribution today. Rebecca is asking, for pharmaceutical companies sitting on vast volumes of clinical and operational data, what practical steps can leaders take to turn that data into a genuine strategic asset rather than a regulatory and security liability? Wow, what a great question, Dave. What do you think?
Yeah, that is a great question. And that really gets to, talking about the starting line of your AI journey, right? Because it all really starts with the data and an evaluation of the data assets that you have. So I think, a couple of things come to mind. The first, in terms of, managing it not to be a liability, and I hate to, sort of start from the risk management perspective, but, there's certainly assure that all of the guardrails are in place from a regulatory and a security and all of those types of compliance aspects that I'm sure Thomas could speak to in much more detail. But and to do that, not do that from the AI perspective, and make sure you understand how LLMs are structured, and how to establish those guardrails around LLMs, and the difference between public LLMs and creating your own private models, and how to manage all of those aspects. And there's certainly plenty of resources and consultants that specialize in that sort of stuff. But then thinking about how to use it as a strategic asset, I think this is actually one of the places that AI can be very beneficial, and we've seen some exciting opportunities around taking your data, taking parts of your data, and getting AI's input. Building some prompt engineering around AI giving suggestions for where the data can be applied to enhance your business or create efficiencies or improve your processes. That's actually something, at its core, the LLMs are, they're just excellent at digesting a lot of content and breaking it down into key points and sort of key themes. So that's a good use of AI, sort of as a starting point to help point in some of those directions. But then I think, to some of the conversation that we had earlier, it's about really breaking down your processes into very discrete steps, breaking down what those manual activities are today, and then looking at how AI can help automate and assist in those human activities that are happening today. Again, can't stress enough the criticality of really breaking it down to that discrete a level, so that you can add the proper context to the AI in building up its knowledge and understanding of what those processes are. That becomes the difference between an efficient AI development process and just really you could spend a lot of time spinning your wheels and reckoning with hallucinations and bugs and all of those types of things if you don't instill that proper context. And so really breaking down and being able to input that knowledge, establish that knowledge base for the AI about your specific organization, your specific data, and your specific processes, I think is critical to leveraging it as that strategic asset.
All right. Important points. All right. Well, folks, we are getting some questions and comments again from our audience. I'd like to open it up to the entire panel here with this comment from John. And John, thank you for your contribution today. John has a couple questions he'd like to pose. John, I'll do my best to communicate what you've asked here. To be a devil's advocate after reading the McKinsey article, John says, the authors acknowledge that 80% of companies using Gen AI report no tangible bottom line benefits, yet project that agentic AI will deliver revenue growth and improvements over the next 3 to 5 years. What specific evidence from actual implementations, not hypothetical workflow analysis, exists today to bridge the gap between widespread Gen AI failure and projected agentic AI success? Do we think it's really just nearly a matter of time as we learn how to best engage with AI and AI continues to improve? And he continues, but more importantly, I'd love to hear from each of you a personal use case that you have found for implementation of AI where it gave you a personal benchmark of success or benefit. In other words, complex research done very quickly or given a task request, quality of an analysis of a question or a problem, a statement. Wow. Okay, John, I really love this question. In other words, where is this being applied in the real world, and what are the real world results? And so I'll open up to the group and I'd like to hear from each of you. Thomas, Julie, Dave, what is a use case that can provide us with some real world perspective here? Anyone?
Wow, that's a
You can go, Julie. Ladies
well,
first.
I was just gonna say I have a couple of examples, but real quick, just to go back to the previous question. I mean, in terms of practicality and implementation, and in terms of having some management there, I really think you have to have at the outset, you have to have an AI governance structure. There needs to be dedicated people for oversight.
Okay.
There's a human responsibility element to this and continuous monitoring. And those are the 4 things I wanted to say around that, because
And who has done that successfully, and what have been the results?
well, there's some big pharma clients I can't name, but basically what you see is once that's implemented, and then you also monitor the regulatory environment. So there is actually an FDA guidance document on use of AI in clinical trials that was produced in January of this year, earlier this year. So it's an interactive thing to make sure that your data is audit ready. It's not a risk. I can't speak to the IT security aspects of it, but I can speak to, making sure that as you're interacting with the FDA, for example, that you make sure that everybody's aligned on what data can be used from
Okay.
AI and what cannot. And that's a key piece of it too. But to
So-
get to a real use case, I can say I recently did an analysis of basically a competitive landscape for an indication. What countries are I'm trying not to breach confidentiality. What countries are conducting trials in a rare disease? What types of clinics are doing these trials? What is their previous experience? What are the standards of care currently for treatment and competitive other trials in certain countries? How long are these trials taking? What's the patient per site per month rate? And are there any other risks for certain regions? What would the timelines be to start these trials in certain regions? And so, what can we do with this amount of money in this amount of time? And where do we go? How do we optimize our trial design and our operational approach in terms of site selection and recruitment rates and that sort of thing? And that, that would have taken me 2 weeks years ago. Running it through an AI platform, you still have to look at it and interpret it and discuss it and even correct AI, but the output was way better than anything I could have done. So it changed my role from searching around, plugging numbers into a spreadsheet, doing all of this stuff manually, to more of an oversight and strategic role where I could look at the data and then make educated decisions and recommendations based on the data instead of just being the manual person tracking down all the data. Does that make sense? So that was
yes.
a really key real world example
Okay.
where
Okay.
I think we could
Yeah.
talk about that one by itself for probably hours, but that was kind of cool.
Now, Thomas, do you have a real world example, especially how responsible use in good practices can mitigate compliance risk? Can you give us an example of a personal use case where you've seen real results in the real world when it comes to GXP?
Yeah. Well, first, maybe a step back to the thing that Julie said. I also want to take a step back, but the FDA guidelines are there, so it's very important to comply with those. And
Yes, it is.
as we move towards this more AI world, we're used to doing a certain amount of deterministic testing or validation of certain solutions. But with AI, that's not possible. It's more of a probabilistic testing and experimental testing. So we have to take into account a kind of evaluation-driven development in these AI solutions to comply with everything that's GXP related. So in the background of it that you need to really understand. There are 4 aspects to it that you really need to take into account. First of all, there's accuracy. You want consistent, correct outputs tying into the hallucinations that Dave already alluded to. You don't want that in your solutions. So this is done by extensive regression testing, validation against benchmarks, and all these things. You want your answers to be grounded. It's a concept called grounding. So which knowledge bases are you tying into your data model? So what is the data that it reasons over? You don't want to expose it to all the available public data, because then for sure you will have hallucinations. MCP is, for example, something you could use to really limit the scope of what your AI model is looking into. Then there's orchestration, and there the FDA guidelines come in. So you want your agents to be orchestrated with the necessary guidelines, which could change, of course. So you want to connect also to these guidelines. If there's any change, that your AI agent is also taking this into account. And lastly, there's of course, the user satisfaction. You need to create feedback loops, A/B testing, reviews, ensuring adoption and trust. So all these things have to come together before you even consider to create a GXP critical solution. The example I want to give to Brian John's question, which is actually a great question, is a real concrete example that we have built. It's not really in pharma, but it has its real KPIs. Because in pharma, it's difficult already to have a use case which is live with these real KPIs, because it's still in development from our side then. But the example I want to give is one that we did for the Flemish government in Belgium. And there's a lot of subsidies that they give to all kinds of organizations. And in order to have this grant or subsidy, you need to comply with a certain amount of rules. In 30 days, we build an agent for them, multiple agents actually, who actually absorb all the invoices, check them against the grant that was given, and check all the policy documents to see whether this grant can be paid out. They did like 6,000 in a year now, and it would have taken them until 2050 to go through all of them, even if they stopped today. So they had a big issue, and they did like they tested 1 out of 10 invoices, and the rest was paid automatically. So there was a huge potential risk of paying out grants that were not actually valid. What we have done is we have built this agent. Now the audits are done in 6 seconds by the AI model. And only when it's not due to regulations, it's flagged to a user. So the workflows can remain the same. They can process many more invoices. And the financial benefits is now 5 to 10 million on a yearly basis. So that's a KPI we managed to get. And this is translatable maybe to clinical trial documents, where you can use the same technology to assess all this documentation and to really go through these unstructured data sets and make something that humans can really use.
All right. All right, folks, we are just about out of time, but I do want to give Dave one last opportunity. What about a case study in the real world that you believe we should be taking note of? Just getting back to John's question about a use case from your experience. Real quick, do you have a story you could tell us?
Yeah, so one quick example that we've worked on is around supply chain for clinical trials, and using AI to take a process that has been historically managed in a reactive manner as a clinical trial evolves and new patients are signed up and activated for the trial. Generally supply is tracked on a monthly basis based upon that sort of reactive data, and as a byproduct of that, it requires usually 50% plus of extra supply that has to be provided to a clinical trial. That translates to millions of dollars, and we've been using AI to not only build proactive planning and forecasting capabilities, but even up to incorporate, say, upstream activity that's taking place in terms of patient recruiting and site activation, and using AI to build predictive models to flow that through to what the supply chain needs are going to be, factoring in things like taking in third-party data and resources like on-time delivery rates across couriers and for different countries and different locations, and starting to layer in, things like weather and customs data to really build an intelligent sensing, true supply chain control tower utilizing AI. And the tangible result of that, apart from risk mitigation of running out of critical medicine for the trial, can be that drastic reduction in waste of product.
Well, all right, fantastic. Where has our time gone? Thomas, Julie, Dave, I want to thank you so much for being our panel today. And I want to thank Rebecca and John for their great questions. Both of you have been awarded this stylish and highly functional AI Talk mug. Thank you for your contributions today. All right, gentlemen and lady, in the time that we have left, I'm wondering if each of you could please provide us with one very quick action item that our viewers can use to take advantage of your ideas and advice today. Dave, do you have an action item for us?
Yeah, real quick, it's two, but really sort of one thing. So the first I would say is do some homework and learn how LLMs and how AI really works. There's so much activity around it and so much expectation, and I think it's important that people just get grounded in how it actually functions to understand it can help you better with your planning. And then secondly, if you have the ambition, I would highly encourage everyone to look at, and you're working with AI and interested in AI, do some vibe coding. And actually, it doesn't take technical expertise. Go and download Lovable or Replit or Bolt or any number of these platforms. They're free. And by just getting your hands dirty, again, it helps you to understand how it works and importantly, what the limitations are. So
All
I
right.
think just getting your hands dirty is important.
That is Dave Anderson, founder and CEO of Data Compass. Dave, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Julie, do you have an action item for us?
Ooh, yeah. I think when I was first getting into this whole AI scene as a pharmaceutical researcher, it's a little scary. I mean, what are these things going to take our jobs? Are these things going to, I think what I've learned now after being involved in this for a couple of years is don't be afraid of it. Start with a pilot, start small. If you're a small company, there's still concrete tasks you can try for this. And the other shift in mindset is it isn't a program. It's not something that you can, like type into Google as a search engine. It's going to learn with you. So put a little bit of time into it and don't be afraid to treat it not like it's some high-tech robot, but if it's creating data for you, if it's analyzing things for you, correct it, guide it, treat it more like that. I think that would be my action item. Don't be afraid of it, and feel free to start small and really treat it like a colleague.
That is Julie Daves, President and Principal Consultant at JVD Pharmaceutical Consulting. Julie, thank you so much for being with us today. Thomas, do you have an action item for us?
Yeah, I think it actually all tied to what Julie and Dave said. Get started and start small. So take these workflows, break them down into tasks, and then select one valuable administrative task and then work on that. You could also, for example, what has been successful for us is having some brainstorm or hackathon session where you sit together. Could be a pizza night, could be a breakfast session. You sit together with your colleagues, you think, brainstorm about some ideas, what's bothering you, you listen to each other, then you come up with a good use case, and that's the one you will tackle first. And then once you go in it together and you solve it, then you will see the value it could create. To Dave's point, get started and ground yourself in what an LLM is, and then produce a point with some good use case, get started and go from there.
All right. Very good. That is Thomas Van Dorp, pre-sales architect at Sageca. Sajeka, Thomas Van Dorp. Thank you so much, Thomas. Julie and Dave, it's been great speaking with you today. Your perspectives were spot on. I hope that we get a chance to talk again soon. And to everyone joining us today, thank you too. What a great crowd we've had here online with us, joining in with the discussion. Please join us again next time on November 13th with another great panel of guests. We'll be talking about AI at scale in healthcare. That should be another great discussion. And in the meantime, if you'd like to find me, you can do so on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect there. I'm Kevin Crane. And you can check out my weekly audio podcast, the Digital Transformation Podcast. But for now, that'll do it for this episode of AI Talk. And until next time, I am Kevin Crane saying thank you for watching.